Calvin Coolidge, the 30th President of the United States, served from 1923 to 1929. Coolidge was a shy, silent New England Republican who led the United States during the boisterous jazz age of the 1920s. This solemn, frugal president seemed to be from another era, but people liked him for being like their pioneer ancestors. He enjoyed great popularity and could have been re-elected to a third term in the White House. Instead, he retired in 1929. Hi, I'm George Tucker at the President Calvin Coolidge State Historic Site in the village of Plymouth Notch, Vermont. Calvin Coolidge was born in the back of this general store in Plymouth Notch on the 4th of July in 1872. He was the only son of John Calvin Coolidge, a farmer, storekeeper, and politician, and Victoria Josephine Moore, who also came from Plymouth Notch. The future president was named for his father, John Calvin, but they just called him Calvin, or Cal. When Calvin was 4 and his sister Abigail was 1, their father bought a small farm across the road from the family store. Cal helped with the farm chores and went to school in the small stone schoolhouse nearby. When he was 12, his mother died. The next year, he entered Black River Academy at nearby Ludlow, Vermont. While studying there, his sister died of an appendicitis. Cal graduated from Black River Academy in 1890 and entered Amherst College in Massachusetts in 1891. At college, he showed great interest in politics and graduated with honors in 1895. He read law with a firm in Northampton, Massachusetts, passed the bar exam in 1897, and then opened his own law office. Cal's father was a politician who served 3 terms in the Vermont House of Representatives, 1 term in the state Senate, and held many local public offices, and he passed his political insight on to his son. In 1896, at the age of 24, the future president became an active worker for the Republican Party. In 1898, he was elected to the city council in Northampton, Massachusetts, and became its city solicitor in 1900. He won re-election in 1901, but lost in 1902. In 1904, Coolidge met his future wife, Grace Goodhue, a teacher. They were married on October 4th, 1905, and had 2 sons, John and Calvin Jr. Coolidge was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives in 1906 and re-elected the next year. In 1909, he became mayor of Northampton. From 1912 to 1915, he served in the Massachusetts State Senate. He was elected lieutenant governor in 1915 and twice won re-election, then became governor of Massachusetts in 1918. As governor, Coolidge became nationally famous during the Boston police strike of 1919. When almost 3/4 of Boston's 1,500 police officers went on strike, Coolidge made his famous declaration: "There is no right to strike against the public safety by anybody, anywhere, anytime." That statement won him re-election to governor by a record vote. At the Republican National Convention in 1920, he received the vice presidential nomination, supporting Senator Warren G. Harding of Ohio for president. In the election, The friendly and easygoing Harding and Coolidge, silent and unsmiling, won an overwhelming victory over their Democratic opponents. As vice president, Coolidge attended meetings of President Harding's cabinet, the first vice president to do so. But he always remained true to himself. Even in the social world of Washington, he rarely smiled, almost never laughed, and sat silently through official dinners. Early in the morning of August 3, 1923, while he was on vacation at his father's farm here in Plymouth Notch, Coolidge was awakened in the middle of the night with the startling news that President Harding was dead. By the light of a kerosene lamp in the sitting room of his family home, Calvin Coolidge was administered the presidential oath by his father, a notary public. Then he went back to bed. The next day he returned to Washington by train. Coolidge entered the White House just as the Teapot Dome scandal was hitting the newspapers. It involved illegal kickbacks paid to members of Harding's administration. He made no effort to shield the guilty, and in 1924 forced the resignation of Harding's Attorney General and other high officials who had been connected with the scandal. But he continued Harding's policy of supporting American business, favoring a program of what he called constructive economy. He believed that the chief business of the American people is business. During the Coolidge administration, Congress reduced income taxes, but revenue from other taxes increased, so he was able to reduce the national debt by about $1 billion a year. Coolidge had no real rivals for the Republican presidential nomination in 1924, and he was nominated on his party's first ballot. The delegates chose Charles Dawes, director of the Bureau of the Budget, as Coolidge's vice president. Running on the slogan, "Keep Cool with Coolidge," the president promised that the country would remain prosperous and peaceful if he stayed in the White House. Coolidge and Dawes received more than half of the popular votes, and on March 4, 1925, Chief Justice William Howard Taft became the first former president in history to administer the presidential oath of office. Coolidge's inaugural address was the first to be broadcast by radio. Life in the Coolidge White House offered an interesting contrast between the quiet and reserved Coolidge and Grace, his lively, socially active wife. The president had an interest in many behind-the-scenes details of the White House and enjoyed appearing unexpectedly to check up on his staff. He also liked to play practical jokes and would ring for the elevator just to watch all of his aides run in at once. During his second term, success in foreign affairs were marked by two main achievements for Coolidge: the improvement of relations with Mexico and the negotiation of the multilateral Kellogg-Briand Pact to outlaw war. Shortly after his nomination in 1924, tragedy struck the Coolidges. Their son, Calvin Jr., developed a blister on a toe while playing tennis on the White House courts. The resulting infection spread, and the 16-year-old died of blood poisoning. The president later wrote, "When he died, the power and glory of the presidency went with him." 2 years later, in 1926, his father died. President Coolidge seemed to lose interest in politics after that. On August 2, 1927, while vacationing in South Dakota, the president called newsmen to his office and handed each a slip of paper. It read, "I do not choose to run for president in 1928. Once Herbert Hoover became president, Coolidge returned to Northampton, Massachusetts, where he bought an estate he called The Beeches. He published his autobiography in 1929, and the next year began writing a series of daily newspaper articles about government, economics, and politics. He served as a trustee of Amherst College and was named a director of the New York Life Insurance Company. But the stock market crash and resulting nationwide depression that began just after he left office distressed Coolidge. He became increasingly unhappy as the depression deepened, and on January 5, 1933, his wife found him lying on the floor of their bedroom. He had died of a heart attack. The 30th President of the United States was buried here, beside his son and father, in the Plymouth Notch Cemetery. Americans respected the views of this staid and close-mouthed president, whose reputation for wisdom was based on his common sense and dry wit. He rarely wasted words, and he had a typical response when reporters asked about leaving the White House. He told them, "I have had a very enjoyable time in Washington."